Okay, welcome to CS 301, the course on operating systems. If you're in the wrong classroom, you may wish to leave at this point of time. So it's going to be a different experience of teaching operating systems this time, given the remote mode of teaching. And especially so because this course has a significant lab component also over and above the regular theory courses that you might be doing. So it will pose some challenges and we'll have to work towards it ourselves in order to just see. I guess there are some more participants. Just 1 second. I guess there are some more participants. Right. So the first thing first, the link to the Google Classroom is, you may just capture this. This video is also being recorded, so you can also go back and take note of this. You're requested to register on this Google Classroom link as soon as possible, because starting today, immediately after the lecture, we'll post some material on this, and Google Classroom will be the only platform in which we'll be doing all the discussion. Again, some participants. Can I please request all of you to come on time, because it's very nagging, especially in the online environment, because if I have to admit right. So the link to the Zoom meeting is the following, which you have already joined. So before we get into the meat of the discussion and understand the course logistics, I'll very quickly walk you over why we should be bothered about studying operating systems. And by the way, for the default that we'll keep for our conversation is that all of you are on mute, but you should just unmute yourself and ask anything if you want, because chat is difficult to monitor for me. It just defocuses. Someone, I guess, has pushed something on chat. Can you speak it out, please? Okay, so let's just speak out these things. Otherwise, it gets. Okay, so I'll assume a lot of you would have used Windows, Linux, Mac, and more recently, a lot of you would have also used these mobile operating systems, such as Android, iOS, and some of you might have also played with things like Chrome OS, right? So a plethora of these have been exposed, you would have been exposed to. So which of these, so anyone here has used MS-DOS, except for, I believe, maybe Tom Glint, who's a TA, who is also probably old enough like me to have been born in an era where MS-DOS was the default operating system. Okay, so a question to all of you, and again, I would request you to unmute yourself and answer this, because monitoring chat will be non-trivial. So has anyone seen any major change in the recent operating systems? Yes, no change seen?
Sir, Windows rolled out this Ubuntu. Windows rolled out this WSL2 recently.
Right. So right. Okay. So this was you, Raj.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So the TA should. Okay. That is. The answer is correct that Windows rolled out Windows subsystem for Linux, which is a really big deal. Just 1 second, I think. Okay, everyone is here. Yes, others? Any recent change that you would have seen in operating systems? And could be mobile operating system also. Anyone? You don't have to worry about this being a perfect answer. Anything you would have seen. Like what is the difference between Windows 7 and Windows 10 and whatever Windows is now rolling on with? Or what is the difference between Mac OS, Catalina and Big Sur that they're going to be launching in the fall? Or what is the difference between iOS 13 and 14? Or what is the difference between Android 9 and 10 or so on and so forth? Any thoughts on that? So can you speak it out? I can't, like, I don't want to be context switching and looking at the chat. Can you just unmute yourself and speak? Whosoever has posted on chat. Yes.
We can see highly customizable features, and the windows have become more secure in Windows 10.
Okay, so Windows 10 has become more secure. So I can list out a handful of these, and I would like you to think about these once the class ends, because that's the whole point of studying operating systems, to be well informed about operating systems, to see how they work, why they work, and see what are the changes being pushed. So anyone heard of this thing called APFS? This term called APFS? So this is Apple file system. They introduced this file system because they felt that all of the file systems which were existing, like NTFS or FAT32 or so on and so forth, the details of which we'll study in the last part of the course, they were primarily built around the hard disk era. But now most of us don't use hard disk. Most of us would use solid state drives, SSD, and thus they built a file system around it, which was significantly quicker. Another change you would have seen in the Windows ecosystem is that earlier Windows used to be released as major versions, like Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10. But Windows 10, they said, is the last as such version of Windows. So they've also sort of moved to the Apple Mac OS like rolling scheme, where the version of Windows keeps on updating. You don't really now have to install Windows 11 ever, because this will keep on rolling. Let's see, what are the other features? So the recent version of the mobile operating systems, like the iPad and the iPad operating system, or the iOS and the Android operating systems, have become much more proficient in handling even more tasks. So they now support external drives and things like that. Earlier, they could not support external drives. They could act as a drive. They could act as a storage device, which could be plugged into a computer, but they could not themselves act as a computer to a passive device. So a lot of these changes have been brought forth in the Linux world. They're now saying that the biggest change in the last few years is going to come. Linus Torvalds has been like mentioning about this for some time. Some time back, I think Windows and maybe even Linux, they dropped floppy support, which was again a big thing, because floppy drives were being supported for so many years, even though no one was using them for the recent few years. But apart from this, I think what gets the most public attraction is just the eye candies, just the top interface which gets exposed, which is both good and bad, because the average user does not really need to care about what is going under the hood. So a few points on why we should be studying operating systems. The first thing is that this falls into the systems bucket, which is an important branch of computer science. So like you have the theory bucket, where you study things like theory of computation or algorithms, data structures, advanced algorithms. You'll have the data science bucket, where you'll study things like data science, machine learning, natural language processing. And then you have the systems track, we'll study things like operating systems and maybe computer networks and computer architecture. So it's a really important branch of CS, and this branch of CS has really pushed many of the other branches also. So for example, a lot of you would be really fascinated by data science, machine learning. Why is data science or machine learning so popular these days? One important reason is that the hardware has become much more capable, and there have been a much more capable now software stack written on top of that to be able to leverage that hardware stack. For example, the GPUs are not new, but only recently have people started using, by recently I mean the past 10 12 years, have people started using GPUs for machine learning. So like even before that, many years before that, people were using GPUs for gaming, but no one knew about GPUs for the case of machine learning. Can you please say it out, whatever is your comment? Because the interface for Zoom, I just lose my pointer for some reason. So whoever wrote that comment, can you speak it out, please? Otherwise, have to cancel, open.
Yes, sir. So sir, it is about the foldable devices, foldable smartphones. So
Right.
the operating systems need to be customized for these foldable devices.
Right. So there has been a rage of these dual screen devices like Microsoft Duo, Surface Duo, and a lot of Asus devices. A lot of these companies are now exploring these different kinds of form factors. And it's non-trivial for both the software and the hardware. While a lot of the people are just struggling itself with the hardware, it's not even clear that how far into the future we'll have perfect devices whose hinges are very strongly built. But the challenge is also very significant on the software front. And there are multiple screens are always adding issues. Motorola also released a new device a few months back, which is again a flip phone, which opens up in a different way compared to a book-like interface, which a lot of foldable phones have. Okay, coming back to why should we study operating systems, there are a few more reasons. Sorry. There are a few more reasons why you should be studying operating systems. One is that you're using the operating system every day. You're attending this call on Zoom, which is on one of your devices, one of your client devices, either your desktop operating system or your mobile operating system, but each of them is an operating system. And each of them is a stack. So even the application on top of that would not have been possible to run without the capabilities that the operating system provides. And the operating system is also a very interesting application of data structures and algorithms. So you have studied a lot of things like heaps, stacks, pointers, and a lot of this code is very heavily used. A lot of these algorithms are very heavily used in operating systems. And you'd be surprised to know that, so some of the things you earlier studied, like sorting a list or going through, iterating through a linked list, you would have thought that there is possibly no practical application outside of HackerRank or other kinds of questions. But operating system is one of the biggest programs that you'd ever encounter, and at various places you'll see a lot of applications of data structures and algorithms. And even from a placements perspective, there is a small set of companies which still focus on system skills. Nutanix, I think, is one of them. There probably will be others also in the pipeline. But from that perspective also, I think it's important to study operating systems. So beyond this, I'll just quickly define what is an operating system, and we'll just see what operating system does. And after that, we'll dive into the course logistics. So let's talk about the different hardware that a typical modern computer or a mobile phone might have. So you'll probably have a screen, you'll probably have a hard disk or some kind of storage. You'll have some kind of a memory, and you'll have some kind of a processor. And there's been a lot of excitement across all of these individual things in the recent past. So like everyone is now talking about 4K displays, or everyone is talking about retina displays or liquid retina displays. In terms of storage, people are talking about SSDs and their modern implementations. In terms of processors, there's been a lot of talk about moving to things like ARM, which is very energy efficient. People are slowly ditching the Intel suite of processors and just ditching that entire line of the architecture line. In terms of memory also, you see that various faster modern variants of RAM are being developed. So just try and imagine the gamut of, or the spectrum of these hardware devices which can exist. So practically you could turn, or you could use Linux on any combination of these. The other operating systems are of course somewhat limited, but you'd see that you can practically do anything. All of these combinations will work on Linux. And that's why running Linux also is, it will run into challenges, because you'll see various problems, because they try to support so many of such devices. Anyone heard about the recent Raspberry Pi 4B model? Anyone here? So, okay. Again, I can't see your chat, but so the Raspberry Pi 4B model now supports, it supports 8 GB RAM. I think the processor is also very hefty. But the important thing is it's a 64-bit operating system. So it's, and the processor ARM based. So even a device of such small size is now, significantly powerful to power even your whole desktop as a desktop. So these are the hardware stack, which is stupendous. There are again different kinds of interaction devices also, which I've not talked about. There are different kinds of styluses. There are different modern trackpads which support a wide variety of gestures. There are some very smart mice, and a whole wide gamut of this. But by themselves, these are not so useful, because at the end of the day, you want to run an application. This application could be anything. Like you could be talking about things like word processors or illustration tools or even programming tools and languages. And finally, you have the set of users who want to run these applications. So the operating system is going to be an interface between the user and the hardware. And the applications also are going to be run on top of the operating system. So this is just to give you a glimpse, or just a very high level overview of what an operating system is and how it interacts and fits into this entire hierarchy. And to appreciate it even more, let's take up this task. Let's say that so I'm currently running Keynote. Let's say if I want to start Pages, or if I want to start anything else in the middle of this presentation. So I'll just press escape. I'll do Command Tab, and let's say I go to Visual Studio Code, right? So what do you think happened? Can you unmute and think what happened? Like I just changed my application. I just Alt Tab or Command Tabbed into a different application. Like, why was this possible? Or does the operating system have anything to do in it? Or is it just the applications were built to be smart enough to do this? Yes, any thoughts?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
So so here I think is a function of process management by operating system, which is to manage the different processors, like how a process is assigned a processor, and how many threads it will be concurrently running on a single core.
Right, excellent. So think of it, you were doing something else, and then you have context switch. You have changed to a different running program. But if I go back, do I start the application from scratch? Do I start a new instance of it, or do you start from the place where I was originally there? I do start from the place where I left previously, right? So the operating system, so there has to be a mastermind, or there has to be a software program, which also works in conjunction with the hardware, which is able to store the current state of execution. Like if I context switch, it knows where the previous program stopped. If I context switch back that program again, like I've again started the Keynote application, it has to know where I stopped previously. It should not be starting from scratch. Otherwise, that just defeats the purpose of multitasking, right? But I could have done something else also, right? I could have clicked on any of these things, right? I could have clicked on, let's say, system preferences. How does that invoke an application? So again, the operating system will be running this application. It will be bringing it to life. So the application would be residing somewhere on the persistent storage, on the solid state drive or the hard disk drive, whatever you're using. In my case, I'm using a solid state drive. So the application needs to know, so the operating system needs to know that, this is my mouse pointer. I've clicked it here. So it needs to register the click. It needs to also move to that position. It needs to then understand that this is just an icon. This is not the application, but this icon is a shortcut to an application which is stored on the hard disk or on the persistent storage. And that persistent storage then needs to be, so that persistent storage, just think of it as just a program. It's just, like a regular executable C program that you've written, a hello world C program that you've written. But it needs to run that. It needs to bring that to life. It needs to allocate memory to it. It also needs to do some housekeeping, start the process, get it state, understand that, maintain some information about the process, maintain some information about where is the process in the current line of execution. So all of these tasks are being done by the operating system. And if I start the process now, where does it reside? It will be residing in the main memory now, which is the random access memory, the RAM memory. So the operating system again has to take a program which is lying on the hard disk and bring it to RAM. But the operating system has to do this really smartly also. So imagine that you would have probably seen some games, right, which would be, let's say, 20 GB in size. Let's say huge. I'm just giving an arbitrary number. But let's say you have only 8 GB of memory. Does it mean that the game will not run? No, it doesn't mean that, because the operating system will be smart enough to load only those components of the game into the memory which are required for the current execution. There could be, there could be levels in the game, let's say, for instance, which you're not playing currently. So it doesn't make any sense to bring those into execution. So all of these things are also handled beautifully by the operating system. And let's say if I'm typing something into, so if I go here and if I'm typing something, right, what happens now? So again, the operating system has to work with the input devices. It has to register that a key has been pressed, right? So it's, if you think about it, it's so beautiful that so many things are happening concurrently and you don't even know behind the scenes what is happening. So there are network packets being sent back and forth via which this Zoom call is going. If I'm typing something, it is getting registered. And it's not that it's getting registered in some haphazard sense, it's getting registered in the same order. And if I open this same file again in a different editor, so if you see this, now this white dot has occurred, which means that there is some edit made, but I can open the same thing in some other editor also. So operating system again has to maintain a sense of what does the content of the file, what is the content of the file? So does it contain this modified content? If I open it in another editor, what happens if I synchronize across, or if I try and edit a file across different of these applications? Again, it's the task of the operating system to figure this out. So in short, the operating system is doing quite a lot, which I'll just categorize now across some broad categories. First, the operating system is going to manage multiple programs. So at any point of time, you'll see that thousands of such programs are running.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Some people are stuck in the waiting room. Can you just accept them for now? Maybe you can tell them.
Okay. Okay. Okay, for some reason, my mouse just disappears when I go full screen. So I have to again cancel this out. Right, so the operating system is going to manage the task of running multiple programs, which is, if you think about it, it's a non-trivial program. So imagine if you are being asked to do 1,000 different tasks and manage between all of them and ensure that all of them cooperatively work without having any issue. The second thing is that OS will interface with the hardware using an easy interface. Now imagine that if you were to write a program, let's say if you want to create Adobe Illustrator-like program, or you want to create a Microsoft Word-like program, and imagine if you had to write the logic to handle the mouse and the keyboard events yourself? Don't you think it will be a waste of time and it will be incredibly hard to do? Because now you'll have to build the logic to even do some low-level operations. So the operating system provides a very nice interface in which it will give a high-level interface towards what is being typed. So it probably will just tell you, it will probably give the application what was being typed, rather than the application having to figure out the exact frame buffer and the serial length and the various communication and different protocols. And the OS is going to transform program to a process. So the difference between a program and a process is that if you've let's say written a program in C, which is a hello world program, it is lying on the hard disk as an executable, let's say hello.out. Till the time it is run, it is just a program. When it is running, it is called a process. So process is a program under execution. But this entire thing is being handled by the operating system. And as I mentioned just a few minutes back, this task is non-trivial. It has various facets. You need to allocate memory to the program. You need to also ensure that the program is given enough CPU cycles. You need to ensure that the program gets the required input-output cycles. You need to also ensure that the context of the program is being maintained, so on and so forth. And the OS is also going to be managing the memory, the disk, the peripheral. So quite a lot of things that the operating system ends up doing. So this course will be divided into 3 main parts. And that's also the title of the textbook that will be following: Operating Systems 3 Easy Pieces, TEP. And the textbook is freely available online. So I'll also link that in the course website, probably would be already there. The 3 parts of the course are: the first part is called virtualization, which, as you would have expected from the literal English meaning, it means to take a physical resource and convert into a virtual resource. So the physical resources are things like CPU, disk, memory, and you basically want to give the illusion that each program thinks that they have the CPU to themselves. So if Microsoft Word was running, it will think that I have the entire CPU. Of course, it is never the case. And if Adobe Illustrator is running, it also thinks about, it has the entire memory or the entire CPU to itself. Similarly, each program also thinks that they have their own memory. But in actual, no one has allocated the entire chunk, or what is being presented to them is a virtualized interface, an easy to work interface for accessing the CPU and the memory. The second part of the course is on concurrency, which is on running multiple things at once. Now, you might be wondering, why are we talking about concurrency when we were talking about an operating system? Because an operating system is an example of a really good concurrent program, which is doing many things in one go, which is incredibly hard to do. And as we'll see when we go through this course, that there are numerous challenges which come when you do some concurrent programming. So as we saw previously, that what is the state of a text file when we have multiple editors trying to edit it, right? So these are all things which come under the gamut of concurrency. And the reason why concurrency has become really important is that, one, you want to execute multiple programs at once. The second is that you want to make good use of all the parallelization and the advancement in hardware that you have. So you would have probably seen that the clock frequencies of modern processors are almost saturated due to various factors, such as it's getting to the point where it's physically impossible to run more or add more compute power to the chips. They're already so small, and there's of course heat dissipation issues. So the way people have been doing this better is now to allocate to join multiple of these processors instead of just making a big monolithic single processor which is stronger. And the third part of the course will be on persistence. So imagine if you do a lot of hard work, but your program is not being saved. So that's typically a very frustrating feeling, but the operating system takes care of the persistence. So it takes up the task of storing what you have into the hard disk. So for example, when you're typing something on a word processor, till the time you have saved something, it was probably lying in the just in the memory, the RAM, but you want to save something to the hard disk, and that process is again a non-trivial process because the hard disk is again a hardware device. The software that you're writing is an application. It needs to understand what is the action being done. It needs to figure out that, how many bytes do you want to write, and the hard disk will also then present an interface on which you want to write. So think of hard disk as a huge array now. So the operating system figures out, how to communicate with the hard disk driver and then do the writing or the reading tasks. Right, so these were the broad 3 pieces of this course. And to give you a better glimpse of how CPU virtualization works, we'll just run a simple program. Let's first just see what this program does. So this program just imports time, it imports sys. So it takes as an argument, whatever is the system argument, the command line argument being passed, it just sleeps, right? So let's just run this program and see what we get. Python CPU virtual.py, and I'll just give it an argument 1. And let me just run it in the background. So we see it will keep on pushing 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And right, I basically have no control over this because I have not redirected the output to a different pipe. So I can then just run my activity monitor and I can kill it from there, or I can just use the command line also to kill it from there. This was called CPU virtual. Can I find this? Okay, for some reason I am unable to find. Okay, maybe this will be under Python. Yeah, this is under Python 3.7. So you might be thinking this is also weird, right? Why is this program listed under Python 3.7 and why not under the specific name? But if you were to do this exercise with the C program, you might see the actual C program name. So this is left as a homework exercise to you to figure out why this program is showing up as Python 3.7 and not as the name of the program, which is CPU virtual 1.py. And another thing we could do is to run multiple instances of it. Virtual 2 and Python CPU virtual.py 3, right? And you see that mostly it seems to be in the order 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but this can also get sort of jumbled up. And what is happening is that each of these processes with a different command line argument that has been given, when it is running, it thinks it is the only program under consideration or under running. It does not really bother about the other programs. But the operating system is actually running multiple of these together. So the operating system runs one program for some time, context switches it out, runs another program for another time, and then context switches out, and so on and so forth. So just to show that how virtualization is happening under the hood in a simple way, and which we saw through a more complicated example also when we were talking about PowerPoint was running, and then I was shifting on to Visual Studio. Let me kill all of these via the activity monitor or the task manager. And you would have also seen at various times that they always don't appear in order. You'll see some of them being disordered also. So here you see, let's say, you see 213, 213, 213, and then you see 123, right? So this is also something which we need to be very careful about. Although we wrote them in the order 1, 2, 3, but their execution is really left up to the operating system, which decides when to schedule these processes. And we could have also seen these through ps and top command. And we can also run another program to just talk briefly about memory virtualization. So we'll talk about all of these virtualization techniques in a lot more detail in the coming lectures. But this is just to give a very high level overview to you to So this is a really simple memory program that I've written. And the important thing to note here is that it allocates some space which is equivalent to the size of an integer, and it just prints out the address allocated, and then it just does some filler stuff. So let me run this like this and see what it outputs. So it gives me the address pointed out to by this variable p. Let me just stop it. Let me run this again. And if you would have seen that the address pointed out by C comes to be the same, right? But let's run multiple instances of it now, and let's see what do we get. Okay, so how is this possible that two instances? So we have two different programs now. The number on the left is the process ID. We'll come to it what a process ID is, but think of it as a unique identifier for a different process. Now the address for pointed out by P to in the two different processes seems to be the same. So does it mean that it's a single program, it's a single common memory which is being run, or something else? Any thoughts on this? I should just kill this program, by the way. Otherwise, it will just spin to death and just eat my battery life. Yes, any thoughts on this? It seems to be that both the addresses of the two different programs for a variable is the same, but there are two different programs in essence because there are two different instances of a program. Does it make sense or does it not make sense, or is it a security threat? Can the program 2, the instance 2, now get the data of instance 1 because they're essentially now pointing to the same address? Or is there a trick to this?
Sir, it is because of the virtual memory.
Okay, what is it about the virtual memory?
So two different programs are addressing to two different virtual memories. So for them it seems that they are both the same, but they are not.
Right, good. So just to make it more precise, program 1 sees this particular physical this address, but this is not the address on your RAM. This is an address which the program is seeing as what the operating system is providing. And program 2 is also seeing this address which the operating system is providing. But the operating system maintains a sort of a mapping, a dictionary mapping between this address, a virtual address, and the actual physical address on the memory chip, on the RAM. So this could point out to, let's say, 0x100, and this could point out to 0x500 on the RAM. So that way, the advantage that you get is that each program does not know that what is the physical address being allocated to it. So which is giving you an extra layer of security, and it cannot eat up memory of another process. But this is essentially an illusion. You might now think in class 11th and 12th, you might have been taught that you can print the address of a variable through this way. But what you're printing is not the physical address, it's just a virtual address allocated to you, which is allocated in the program. Right. But if you want to read more, you should read about things like ASLR. And then you'll see that various operating systems now also provide something over and above what is being shown in this example, so that to reduce the overheads, or sorry, to reduce the security concerns even more. And you can also run multiple, you can run things like activity monitor and a tool called VMMap, virtual memory map, which will also show you what each of these addresses actually mean. But we're not going to the details of these presently, and I leave them up for the upcoming labs and for the upcoming lectures. I'll quickly now go on to the logistics. The course website is myname.github.io/teaching/osfault20, which will also be put on the Google Classroom. So you don't need to worry about this. I'll explain the logistics of the course. So the first thing is the first important thing is that the Google Classroom link is also here. You should definitely register on the Google Classroom immediately after the lecture, because we'll be pushing more content today itself. The second important thing is that the class will be run in a flip format, which means that there'll be lectures, pre-recorded lectures made available to you, and the corresponding slides made available to you. You'll have to study them on your own, and the lecture will be as such a discussion and not per se instruction. So we'll meet and we'll just discuss your doubts. In some of these discussions, sort of tutorial discussions sort of sessions, we'll also work through some of the examples or some numerical examples, which may not be very clear from the previous recording, and also to give you some more practice. And they'll be the teaching assistants for the course are Tom Glint, Rishi Rajadhikari, both of them are PhD students, and Vraj Patel and Rohan Patil, who are BTech 4th year CSE students. The course timings you would have already seen: Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, 11 to 12 noon, and labs are from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. The textbook has been linked on the website, and the code that will be used in the classes, in the lectures, and the labs will be put on this link. Importantly, let me go through the some questions about the grading policy, etc. So one quick thing before this, we'll be going at a slightly quicker pace than usual in this course, because I have some personal commitments in October. So we'll probably want to do more theory part then and leave some time in October for your projects. So in terms of the grading policy, there are quite a few components which have already been now, which have some deadlines which are coming up really soon. The first is to create a Zine. So Zine is like a magazine kind of a version for technical things which you want to do. Now it will be in a group of 2, and it will be due on 11th of August. So exactly a week from now. And the evaluation criteria has been mentioned here. You can see some good examples of Zines. So Julie Evans is probably the best technical Ziner in the world. This is a Zine on TCP dump. And she just mentions, what do each of these things mean? So it's basically trying to explain certain things related to operating systems, shell, and systems in general in an easy to digest format. The topics for these Zines, we've already suggested some topics for these Zines, which you are suggested to largely pick up something from this. And then we'll have a sign up sheet where 2 members will be signing up. You should definitely just check this out, these topics out, and get some sense of what is expected. We don't expect 20 pages. We expect something minimal. So this is a Zine from the previous batch. So one of the TA for this course, Rohan, and his partner Sumit made this, and this was on traceroute. So this explains what traceroute command does, and it explains in a way that, so think of it as a quick reference that you want to put up in your room for a particular thing. So that's the purpose of Zine. It's worth 5% grade and due on 11th August. We'll also have something known as a CS story. So in CS story, a group of 2 would be preparing a presentation on topics which are similar to the topics in the lecture, but they're, let's say, more modern topics. So things like, let's say, Spectre and Meltdown were a couple of things which the previous batch folks discussed. You could also pick up various such topics. We'll also provide a suggested set of topics initially. So this is the presentation that you'll have to video record, and this will be a time bounded one. Let's say something like 5 minutes. You'll have to video record, or basically screen record, and then share it with us. And this is due on 19th August. And after this 19th August, we'll be showing one story at a time in each lecture at the start. So in the previous offerings, we used to do this in the physical setting, in the sense that a student would send me their slides and I would show them at the start of the lecture. The students would be presenting it live. But given the virtual constraints, you'll have to pre-upload this. And again, we'll be providing some suggestions on this. There'll be a Viva component. There'll be 3 Viva corresponding to the 3 topics. First, there is virtualization as one topic, file persistence as the second topic, and concurrency as the third topic. Each of this Viva would be about will be 12%, and the first Viva would be around 5th September. So this is the week of the first assessment, and the first Viva would be held there. The projects would be in groups of 4. The project topics would be released at the end of this month. We want you to first understand the theory much better and do some laboratory experiments before you take up different topics, because it doesn't make sense to take up something about which you have not studied any amount of theory. But the presentation would be the project would be total 30% grade, out of which 20% would be regular meetings with the TAs. This would be 3 meetings in total. And the final presentation to the instructor would be 10%. And there would be 2 programming assignments, which should be pretty heavy. So, and there'll be 2 into 12%. The first assignment is due on 26th August. The first assignment is to create a shell in C. So this is again not the final assignment. This is just to give you a sense of what to expect in this course. So I was running something on a shell here, right? Like I was running my programs on the shell. I write ls, I write pwd, I write mv, I write rm. At the end of the day, the shell is also a program on which you're writing more programs. So the idea is that you have to create a shell in C, which can run inbuilt binaries like ps, pmap, wget with their arguments. So it has to then tokenize the input. It has to understand what command is being run. And then you have to implement some commands on your own. Things like you have to implement ls, which is to list the contents of a directory, and grep, which is used to search for certain patterns on certain strings, cat to show the contents of a file, move, copy, change directory, show the current directory, and change the permission, make directory touch. So this will become a fully fledged shell that you have to build, and you have to code up using good coding practices, and the code has to be, we'll make it available. We'll suggest that it is version control on GitHub. And then we'll also have a Viva or a running demonstration for this, so that we ensure that you have understood what you have done and it's not just copy pasted from somewhere. The collaboration policy is that you can collaborate with as many people as you want, but at the end of the day, you should understand it really well. And the final piece of code that you turn up should be yours. Like you can discuss, but what you've written in the code or what you've uploaded, submitted should be yours. And that will be grilled during the Vivas also. So it will become really clear if you've done the work on your own or not. And right. So the laboratory experiment, the lab will start on Thursday. We'll be working through the first lab would be on Linux shell and various different commands, which would give you a sense of more belonging to this course, and also understand how different operating systems, different processes, different memory management is happening. So there are various ways in which you can prepare for the lab. In the previous offering, we did this using the lab computers, where we installed a virtual machine running Ubuntu. So the link for that virtual machine and instructions for installing that are mentioned here. So you can either install the virtual machine on your system using these instructions, or you can, if you're running Windows, you can run Windows subsystems for Linux, and you can get this to work. And the third way is, if you don't want to install something, is to use an online IDE or online shell. This is probably not going to take you the full distance. So we still kept skeptical about this, but if you want to give it a go, you should definitely try it out. But we won't be able to support this fully. It will be an issue. The way the labs will be run is that we divide you people in various subgroups, and a TA would be assigned to each of the subgroup, and the TA will then monitor this subgroup and see what doubts they have and try to answer them. Because again, in the physical world, the TA could have just moved to a person and then answer the question. but that is not going to be possible. The projects will be made available later, not now. Okay, so that's it from my end. I am open to questions now.
Sir, I'm Rutik from third year electrical. So we have a clash at this time.
Okay, so
the previous slot from 10 to 11, that is like free for us, I think. So if you could ask the other people if they're okay with it, can we change it to that?
So I would request you to communicate with the class representative and the other students. I still don't have the list of the students. I don't know who all are there yet. Like, I just know the people who have turned up today, but there could be people who have registered but not turned up today, and we cannot proceed towards changing anything before everyone is on the board. And this, of course, has to be done in due consideration with the ACAD department. So I would request that first you do it at your level, talk to the class representative of IT Computer Science, and then also if and when the list comes up on the IMS, I can pass that to you. Does it sound good?
Yes, sorry.
Yes, other questions? So in fact, even for tomorrow's lecture, we'll immediately after the class, I'll put on the Google Classroom the link for the video and the slides for tomorrow's discussion. So it won't be a lecture as discussed. It would be you watching through and we then coming back tomorrow and discussing it. Yes, other questions? So any question about the course policy, any other clarification? So I should probably mention that the course would require a fair understanding of the C language. I mean, you should be able to code in C, you should be very comfortable in that. Otherwise, the assignments and the project would become very difficult for you. Yes, any question? Okay, in case there are no questions, we'll end today's lecture. I'll upload the lecture on Classroom, and I'll also upload the material for tomorrow's discussion. Right? Okay, thank you. Bye.